The woman climbed into bed excitedly, lifting the covers, only to be warned by a gun. The man dragged her and threatened that if she was a Jew, he will finish her off with his own hands. And the woman says, The woman's name is Rachel. She was a Jew. In September 1944, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands and began killing Jews. Rachel escaped death. She lives in a remote farmhouse. On this day she is sunbathing by the river, flirting with a young sailor. Just then, a bomber swept overhead and dropped a bomb. The farmhouse is instantly destroyed. Without a place to hide, Rachel had to follow the sailor to run away. And then, someone claiming to be from the Dutch underground found them. He said he could arrange for the two of them to be smuggled to other countries for refuge, but they had to prepare enough money to survive. Rachel came to the lawyer's office. She took some of her father's assets. She took some of the money from her father's estate. At the appointed time, a carload of people disguised as prisoners arrived at the ferry. Here Rachel was reunited with her family after a long time. Then they left by boat. The deck was crowded with Jews trying to escape. Just as everyone was letting down their guard, thinking they could escape, a bright light suddenly shone on the boat. This was followed by a barrage of heavy gunfire. The Germans wiped out everyone on board. Rachel watched her family die in front of her eyes. There was nothing she could do. She had no choice but to jump into the water and run for her life. The Germans took all the bodies off the boat. They searched the bodies for their belongings. The gold, silver and jewels were plundered. These poor Jews, they were dumped on the river like garbage. Bichur hid in the reeds, watching everything with grief. The only thing she could do was to remember the executioner's face in her mind, waiting for the day when she could take revenge. To deceive the Germans, she pretended that the body was lying in a coffin. After being taken to safety in a hearse, she dyed her hair blonde and hid in the factory where she worked. Here she met the real Dutch underground and becomes one of them. One day she is given a secret mission to work with Hansen in the organization, posing as a couple, to deliver a box of radio guns. But in the process of delivery, the Germans raided the case. Rachel carried the case to the high-class carriage. When she saw the German officer inside, she immediately opened the door and went in, and the officer saw this beauty. He was a gentleman and helped her put her suitcase away. Rachel knew that as long as she sat with the officer, the soldiers underneath would not dare to search, and so it was. The officer's name was Alan. He loved collecting stamps, so Rachel approached him, lying about her love of stamps. Alan seems to have taken an interest in Rachel. When he and Rachel parted, they had some reluctance in their eyes. The woman offers herself only to gain information about the enemy. When she's about to get her way, the man takes her face, and he sees her trick.
Was der schwarzes Haar? Vielleicht hilft dir diese Mode ja zu überleben. Zum Beispiel, wenn du Jüdin bist.
Rachel's pupils dilated, and she became nervous, but then she calmed down and went on the offensive. Alan couldn't resist. He overlooked Rachel's suspicions. Before that, the Dutch underground was exposed by a car accident. Key members were captured by the Germans. The leader sent Rachel to approach Alan on her own initiative. She dyed all her hair blonde. She was afraid that Alan would see that she was a Jew. The next day she went alone to the German office. On the pretext of delivering stamps, she meets Alan. He couldn't get enough of her. He then invites her to a celebration party for the Nazis in the evening. Looking around at all the enemies, Rachel was a little scared. And what scares her even more is the man playing the piano on the stage. He was the man who killed her family, Franken. A wave of nausea washed over her. Rachel ran to the bathroom and vomited furiously, but she immediately adjusted her emotions. She sang along with the piano music that Franken played. She sang at the party. Her beautiful voice and her beautiful face attracted the attention of all the men in the room, not to mention Alan. So much so that by the end of the party, Rachel succeeded in winning Alan. She was offered a position as a secretary. With this position, it was easier for Rachel to get information. She took the portrait off the wall. She used a knife to cut through the paper shell behind it. She pulls a wire from her stocking and installs it in the portrait. By listening in, Rachel learns that the man who helped her and her family get on the ship was a spy for Franken. He specializes in smuggling rich people across the border. And then Franken caught them all. And then Franken would take them all, knowing the truth. Rachel, angry, she proposed to the organization to assassinate Franken. However, the leader was worried that this would anger the Germans. He refused Rachel's request. Rachel was furious, but Hansen told her that she could deal with the spy first. So Rachel and Hansen took a small group of men, executed the man as they had hoped. But with his death, Ellen's suspicions of Rachel grew even deeper.
Der tritt ganz zufällig eine wunderbare Frau in mein Leben. Ein paar Tage später erscheint sie im Reichshauptquartier und hat ganz zufällig all die Briefmarken dabei, die mir fehlen. Ganz zufällig stellt sich heraus, dass die Dame Jüdin ist. Gerade an dem Tag, als sie anfängt bei uns zu arbeiten, wird ganz zufällig Frankens bester V-Mann erschossen. Entweder du behältst dein Geheimnis für dich und ich übergebe dich morgen früh an Franken.
Rachel confessed everything. She knows that Alan's heart is for peace. She would never betray herself. Alan, who also hated Franken. So he and Rachel teamed up to set a trap for Franken. He wanted to bring him down on charges of self-interest. But when he opened Franken's safe, he didn't find anything, and he turned the tables on him. Alan was accused of treason, and Alan was sent to prison for that. This group of women in their nightgowns, with humiliating signs in their hands. They are pulled by men and cut their hair bald. Their faces are painful, but they dare not resist. And the more cruel the man who humiliated them, the more they were cheered, just because they had served the Germans. When Ellen was imprisoned, Rachel, the lover, was not caught. At night, the Dutch underground was ready to rescue the members of the organization who had been captured before. Rachel asked them to rescue Ellen as well, because by now Rachel was already in love with Alan. It was time for action. Rachel opened the door of the underground passage from inside. The members entered the German base, successfully rescued all the companions, but everything seemed too smooth. It turned out that the Germans had been informed of the ambush in the early morning. The entire rescue team was almost wiped out. Only Hansen escaped, and Rachel's identity as a spy was already exposed, but she didn't know it herself. She also tried her best to please Franken. When the banquet meeting was over, she was taken to Franken's office. Franken ordered someone to cover her mouth. Then he deliberately praised her over and over again into the wire. In this way, Rachel was made a traitor by the underground. When the Germans were done using her, they put her in a cell to be shot. Fortunately, Alan was rescued by a very sincere subordinate, and then he took Rachel with him to escape. The two of them hid in a small boat. They lived an uneventful life until the news came over the radio that the Germans were retreating. The war was over. The Dutch had won the final victory. But for Rachel and Alan, the nightmare had only just begun. To prove her innocence, Rachel had to catch the real traitor in the organization. She first suspects her lawyer, who knows all about her, but when confronted, she doesn't explain, just took out a black book. The truth is in it. As soon as the lawyer steps out of the apartment, he is assassinated. Alan ventured out after her. All he could think about was how to clear Rachel's name. He forgot that he was a Nazi officer. As luck would have it, he is recognized by the Dutchman. They were both arrested. Rachel is sent to the factory as a spy for rehabilitation. Here everyone is a fanatical judge. The men were stripped of their pants. The women were stripped of their tops. Rachel is determined not to comply, and she was beaten. Even dung was poured over her head, and then rinsed with a high-pressure water gun. Just then Hans appeared out of nowhere. Rachel was rescued from the abyss. Rachel goes out and asks for news of Alan, but Alan had been executed. Heartbreak and sadness instantly rushed to Rachel's heart. She couldn't stop shaking. Hans gave her a shot, and it wasn't a sedative. It was an overdose of insulin. It was then that Rachel realized Hans was the traitor. As Hans stood on the balcony and received the cheers of the crowd, Rachel struggled to get out. The chocolate Alan gave her and ate it. After recovering her strength, she leapt from the balcony. She escaped from Hansen's clutches. She took the black book and found the leader of the organization. All the truth came out. Rachel was finally cleared of any wrongdoing. At the same time, Hans began to escape. He hid in the coffin, but was still found by the organization. Rachel tightened the screws of the coffin, and Hansen was buried forever. She finally got her revenge. Finally, Rachel left Holland. She returned to Israel to become a teacher. She married and had children. But when the truck full of weapons appeared, the country will enter another unstable future.